Have you ever felt it? That strange, quiet hum of a conflict you never actually signed up for. You didn't march into a war zone. You didn't enlist. You never put on a uniform. And yet, somehow, you get the distinct feeling that you're already on a battlefield. A battlefield with no guns, but one that's fought with silence. No bullets, just beliefs. And the most terrifying part, for a long time, you probably didn't even notice. That's because war today isn't announced with blaring trumpets and formal declarations. It's installed. It's a quiet update pushed to your feed while you sleep. It embeds itself in your fears, in the things you choose to look away from, in your silence. You were never forced to pick a side in the old-fashioned way. You were programmed to. Think about it. It happens with headlines that have already decided for you who the enemy is. It's in the subtle shift of language that teaches you, almost invisibly, who to hate and who to champion. It's in the very architecture of the algorithms that shape what you see, and more importantly, what you never see, what you never get the chance to question. And every single time you kept quiet, every time you scrolled past a video of a bombing, a burning building, a broken city, because it felt distant or complicated, or maybe because it just wasn't your side, you became the exact soldier they needed. Not a rebel, not a monster, just obedient. There's a famous phrase for this, coined by the philosopher Hannah Arendt: the banality of evil. And it's a terrifying concept, because it suggests that evil isn't always grand, or dramatic, or obvious. It doesn't always have a villain's monologue. Sometimes evil looks perfectly normal. It looks like ticking a box, following the rules, filling out the forms. It looks like people just nodding along when they're told to. And maybe, if we're being honest with ourselves, we've been nodding too. Maybe we didn't realize that refusing to choose is still a choice, that trying to stay neutral still feeds one side of the equation. And maybe, just maybe, the most dangerous weapon in this entire war is your ability to keep living your life as if none of it is really happening. So before we can even begin to talk about war in the traditional sense, we have to talk about the war happening inside your mind. How did it get there? Who put it there? And why does obedience no longer feel like fear, but instead feels like comfort? Because that comfort isn't freedom, it's programming. And the programmers are counting on you never realizing the difference. This war didn't begin with an explosion. It began with a suggestion, a single headline, a compelling post, a shared opinion that you didn't stop to question. It began with a silence that you mistook for neutrality. There were no boots on the ground, no borders being crossed. It was just minds, slowly, almost imperceptibly, shifting. Ideas aligning, fears being stoked to justify a pre-written conclusion. The modern war isn't fought with tanks anymore. It's fought with perception. And perception is a thing that gets planted, not through overt violence, but through repetition. Not with overwhelming evidence, but with overwhelming emotion. The goal isn't to force you to think a certain way, but to keep you so distracted, so entertained, so outraged, that you don't have the time or energy to think at all. You weren't asked to join this fight. You were absorbed into it. While you were laughing at memes, scrolling through the latest trends, numbing your senses with an endless fire hose of content, someone, somewhere, was installing a belief system inside of you. Softly, strategically, patiently. They weren't looking for fighters. They were looking for followers. And not even angry, passionate ones, just silent ones. Because in this new kind of war, silence is loyalty. Loyalty is obedience, and obedience is everything. You probably didn't notice the exact moment when asking honest questions became dangerous. You didn't pinpoint the day when nuance became a sign of betrayal, or when simply thinking for yourself felt like picking the wrong side in a bloody conflict. So, you did the smart thing. You stayed out of it. And in doing so, you enlisted. This war doesn't need your permission. It just needs your passivity. And if you're sitting there thinking, look, I'm not involved, I don't care about politics, I just want peace, then congratulations. That is the exact mindset they worked so hard to engineer. Because in this new vocabulary, peace has been redefined. It no longer means the presence of justice. It means your willingness to just keep scrolling. This isn't a war with battlefields of mud and wire. It's a war fought between belief systems. And the people who win aren't the ones who shout the loudest. They're the ones who quietly, skillfully, convinced you to stop thinking for yourself. You didn't consciously put on a helmet, but they gave you one anyway. It's a helmet forged from opinions you never truly formed, fears you never critically examined, and narratives you never dared to question. And now, you might even wear it proudly, defending ideas that aren't really yours, fighting in wars you don't fully understand, and attacking anyone who refuses to obey the same unspoken rules. That isn't freedom. That is the most sophisticated programming on Earth. And the scariest part is that you were never asked to think. You were just asked to conform. Because the real front lines aren't on the nightly news. They are in your mind. And the moment you surrendered your critical thought was the moment you were drafted. To understand how this works, how millions of good people can be turned into silent accomplices, we have to look back to a single man sitting in a glass box. He wasn't a monster in the way you'd imagine. He didn't scream orders. He didn't torture anyone with his own hands. He didn't personally burn villages or bomb cities. He was a bureaucrat. He filed papers. He followed procedure. And when asked to account for his role in one of the greatest atrocities in human history, his defense was simple. I was just doing my job. His name was Adolf Eichmann, one of the chief architects of the Holocaust. And when the philosopher Hannah Arendt went to Jerusalem to watch his trial in 1961, she expected to see a beast, a psychopath, a sadistic, hate-filled monster. But what she saw was, in her own words, horrifyingly worse. She saw a man who was shockingly, terrifyingly ordinary. He seemed polite, well-groomed. He was, in her view, empty. He wasn't driven by some deep, passionate hatred. He was driven, above all, by a desire to be an obedient, efficient employee. And it was in watching him that Arendt gave the world that phrase that has haunted us ever since: the banality of evil. Evil, she realized, doesn't always come from rage or fanaticism. It doesn't always wear a scary mask or wave a dramatic flag. Sometimes it looks like paperwork. It looks like procedure. It looks like politeness. It looks like a man who never once stopped to ask if the system he was serving was right, only if he was serving it correctly. Evil, she argued, spreads not through passion, but through passivity. Evil grows when ordinary people stop thinking. It flourishes when they follow systems without question, when they prioritize their own comfort over their conscience. And that's what scared Hannah Arendt the most. It wasn't the monsters, it was the mediocrity. In her writings, she observed, the sad truth is that most evil is done by people who never make up their minds to be good or evil. They just go along. They normalize the unacceptable. They dilute their own sense of responsibility until it's so watered down they can't feel it anymore. They outsource their morality to whatever system they happen to be in, and they convince themselves, I didn't know. I didn't mean for this to happen. I never chose this. But here's the devastating truth she uncovered. You don't actually have to choose evil to become a part of its machinery. You just have to stop choosing altogether. And if you think for a second that this is just a history lesson, that it's only about Nazis or long-dead dictators or regimes from black and white photos, you're missing the entire point. Because the exact same psychological mechanics that Arendt warned us about are alive and well right now. They operate in the subtle ways we justify what our side does. They're present when we dismiss civilian deaths as unavoidable collateral damage. They're in the way we use labels to silence our own empathy, and in the way we nod along at something we feel is wrong, simply because everyone else in our circle is nodding too. You don't have to be an evil person to support an evil outcome. You just have to stop asking questions. That's the world Arendt saw. Not one full of villains, but one full of vacant minds. Obedient, efficient, and dangerously normal. And if we don't learn to recognize that pattern in ourselves, we don't just risk repeating history, we become it. You probably don't think of yourself as obedient. You likely think of yourself as open-minded, maybe neutral, someone who tries to be balanced. But obedience in the 21st century doesn't always look like kneeling before a king. Sometimes it just looks like choosing comfort. This brings us to the first trap, the trap of comfort over truth. Let's be honest, the truth is often incredibly uncomfortable. It's messy. It demands action from us. It breaks the comfortable rhythm of our daily lives. It threatens the carefully constructed image we have of ourselves as a good, rational, moral person. So instead of facing that jagged truth, we instinctively choose ease. We scroll past the video of the airstrike because it's too graphic. We mute the story about the grieving mother because it's too depressing. We actively avoid the raw footage because it just feels like too much. But it isn't too much. It's just too real. And comfort is one of the most seductive forces on earth. It whispers in your ear, you're already doing enough just by being aware. It tells you, this isn't your problem to solve. It hands you a perfectly clean conscience for the simple price of your silence. But truth doesn't just vanish when you avoid it. It festers. And eventually, that avoidance turns into something much worse, normalization. Because once you get used to the existence of an atrocity, you stop recognizing it as an atrocity. It just becomes part of the background noise. This leads directly to the second trap, the trap of group belonging over critical thinking. There is something ancient inside of you, something deeply tribal, and its voice is often much louder than logic. It's the primal need to belong. This is why you might not post what you truly think, but rather what will protect your social standing. You share the article that your circle will agree with. You say the right thing, not necessarily the most honest thing. Because saying the wrong thing, the thing that goes against the group consensus, gets you exiled. And in the digital world, exile can feel like a kind of death. You are not alone in this. Most people don't form their core beliefs from a neutral analysis of facts and evidence. They absorb them through loyalty. Loyalty to their country, to their culture, to their political party, to their carefully curated digital tribe. You feel like you're thinking for yourself, but what you're often doing is just rehearsing the arguments that defend your side. In this mindset, your side can do no wrong, and their side can do no right. That's not a state of awareness. It's a state of programming. Arendt gave us another warning here. She wrote, "The ideal subject of totalitarian rule is not the convinced Nazi or the dedicated communist, but people for whom the distinction between fact and fiction no longer exists. And that distinction gets erased not by force, but by the quiet, creeping fear of not fitting in." Which brings us to the final, and perhaps most powerful trap, the trap of silence as survival. There inevitably comes a point where speaking the truth becomes dangerous, a point where saying what you actually believe could make you a target, where introducing nuance is seen as a betrayal of your side, where simply asking a critical question gets you labeled unpatriotic, insensitive, naive, or even dangerous. So what do? You stop speaking, you stop thinking out loud, you watch the world break, and you stay quiet, telling yourself it's the only rational thing to do. After all, everyone else is quiet too. But that silence isn't safety, it's complicity. Every war, every injustice needs two kinds of people to succeed: those who actively carry it out and those who stay silent while it happens. And while you're not the one dropping the bombs, your silence is helping to make the victims invisible. You obey every single day without even realizing it. You obey when you repost the flag, not because you feel a surge of patriotism, but because it's what's expected. You obey when you ignore the destruction in a foreign city, because acknowledging it would challenge your political biases. You obey when you find yourself justifying an action your side took, even when a small voice in the back of your head knows it was wrong. You obey when you consistently choose comfort over confrontation, your group over the truth, and silence over risk. It doesn't feel like obedience, it just feels like normal life. But that is the entire point. This is how modern obedience functions, not with a gun to your head, but with 1,000 tiny compromises, 1,000 quiet nods, 1,000 clicks of approval. And every single time you choose the easy path over the honest one, you become another gear in the machine. Not because you're evil, but because you're afraid. You think your opinions are yours, but how many of them were planted? You weren't handed a weapon to fight in this war. You were handed a story. And that story, like all effective propaganda, came neatly packaged with two key components: a righteous hero and a clear, dehumanized enemy. These roles weren't chosen by you. They were curated for you. Look closely the next time a major conflict breaks out, and you'll see the formula appear like clockwork. One side is portrayed as defending truth, freedom, and humanity. The other side is inevitably evil, chaotic, and inhuman. A single death on one side is presented as a profound tragedy, a story of a life cut short. 1,000 deaths on the other side are presented as a statistic, a regrettable but necessary cost. The camera doesn't just show you violence, it implicitly tells you how to feel about it. A crying child on one side is a victim used to evoke your empathy. A crying child on the other side is a casualty of a war they unfortunately started. Same pain, different narrative. This isn't journalism, it's emotional architecture. It's not designed to tell you what happened. It's designed to tell you what to believe. And once you accept that belief, it becomes your badge of identity. You repost the approved flag. You echo the correct prepackaged phrases. You perform the right kind of outrage. But what you're doing isn't thinking. It's aligning. It's obeying. This manipulation goes even deeper, right down to the words we use. Language doesn't just describe reality, it actively shapes it. And in times of war, language itself becomes the battlefield. An invasion becomes a special military intervention. Dead civilians become human shields. Torture becomes enhanced interrogation. A massacre becomes collateral damage. These phrases are not accidents. They are linguistic sedatives. They are carefully engineered to dull your outrage, to distance your empathy, and to allow you to sleep soundly at night while others bleed. Because if you were forced to call it what it really is, a massacre, an invasion, torture, you would be forced to care. And caring is dangerous. It disrupts the illusion of normalcy. It breaks the spell of compliance. So they don't just feed you facts, they feed you a language that makes your complicity feel clean. And then comes the algorithm, the great amplifier. You think you're exploring the internet, but you're actually being looped. You're being fed the same outrage from the same side, reinforcing the same version of the truth over and over again. The system learns your fears. It learns your tribal reflexes. It learns what triggers your attention. And then, it traps you inside a thought loop designed just for you. From inside that loop, it feels fantastic. You see your views reflected back at you everywhere. You feel certain. You feel moral. You feel profoundly right. But what you're really feeling is controlled. Because if you only ever see information that you already agree with, you're not being informed. You're being programmed. And that's the absolute brilliance of modern manipulation. You're not forced to obey. You're nudged. You're gently guided. You're fed the right outrage, the safe channel for your empathy, the approved kind of doubt. And you think that this is freedom, when really, it's just consent without awareness. Hannah Arendt warned that evil thrives not when people choose it, but when they stop choosing altogether. This is what that looks like in the 21st century. It's not some grand conspiracy or a secret mind control plot. It's just millions of people, one by one, being slowly taught to obey without ever being explicitly asked to. At some point, obedience stops feeling like a decision. It becomes a rhythm, a reflex. It's a setting that was flipped on so long ago you don't even remember, and you never thought to turn it off. You just woke up one day and realized you'd stopped thinking for yourself. Not because you became a bad person, but because you became efficient. It's just easier to obey the structure of the system than to confront what that structure creates. So you repost the right content. You stay silent at the right times. You echo the right outrage. None of it feels forced. It feels normal. That's the trick. The system doesn't want your defiance. It doesn't even need your passionate belief. It just wants your automatic compliance. So where did your moral compass go? It didn't disappear. You handed it over. You delegated it to the group, to the cause, to the political party, to the platform, to the leader who said the words that made you feel safe. And once that happens, you stop asking, what is right? You only ask, what is allowed? What's trending? What will get me attacked? What will keep me protected? Morality becomes an exercise in risk management. You stopped checking your own conscience because you assumed someone else, the group, was doing it for you. But morality doesn't work that way. It requires your presence. It requires tension and friction and personal responsibility. When you delegate those things away, you remove yourself from the consequences of your own inaction. Hannah Arendt watched this exact process happen in real time. She saw ordinary men and women slowly hand over their conscience in exchange for protection, for promotion, for the simple, warm feeling of belonging. And when people tried to understand how it happened, how seemingly good people became cogs in the machinery of genocide, she didn't blame ideology or hatred nearly as much as she blamed something else: thoughtlessness. It was not, she argued, stupidity, but a curious, quite authentic inability to think. The inability to stop, to reflect, to ask why, and to sit with the discomfort of that question. Evil doesn't need your hatred. It just needs your numbness. And thoughtlessness is the perfect fuel. But here is the truth they will never tell you. Awareness is resistance, not guns, not slogans, not loud declarations of war, just awareness. Sharp, quiet, and uncompromising. Because the most dangerous system isn't one that controls your actions. It's one that controls your attention. And once you truly see it, you can't unsee it. They told you not to think too much, that asking questions is divisive. They told you speaking out makes you unstable, that nuance is a dangerous distraction. They convinced you that obedience was maturity and that silence was strength. But now you know the truth. Critical thinking is rebellion, to stop scrolling and start seeing, to ask, whose voice is missing from this narrative? To wonder, what am I being shown and what am I being shielded from? That's how the real rebellion begins. Not in rage, but in the quiet, dignified refusal to nod along mindlessly. You don't need to fight with their weapons. You fight by refusing to be unconscious. You fight by staying awake when the world is begging you to go to sleep. You fight by saying, I will not share what I don't truly believe. I will not align myself out of fear. I will not justify harm just because my side did it. That isn't passive. That is war, fought at the only level that truly matters, the level of your own consciousness. Because systems built on blind obedience don't collapse from external violence. They collapse when people simply stop obeying mentally, when they stop consuming blindly, when they stop being afraid of the truth, when they stop needing permission to think for themselves. So no, you don't need to become a warrior. You just need to become awake. To see the narrative, to see the manipulation, to see the machine trying to pull you in, and to finally say, not this time. Because freedom doesn't begin with a revolution. It begins with the simple refusal to be programmed. You were never asked to pick up a weapon, but you were drafted all the same. Not into a war of nations, but a war of narratives. The war didn't begin out there. It began in your mind, in the part of you that traded responsibility for routine. But now you know. You see the program, and that means you can do something no obedient soldier ever can. You can stop. You can break the pattern. You can reclaim your mind, because you were the soldier all along. And now, you don't have to be.